Hello, I'm Jonasz Lewiński and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. But the situation in Ukraine has been fairly interesting during the last couple of months, and especially the last couple of weeks, not least because of the incursion into Russia's Kursk region. Now, there is an increasing degree of clarity of what it means and what it is intended to achieve, but there are still quite a few things we don't know. So in order to examine this situation and its implications, especially in the realm of geopolitics, we have invited our guest today, Marcin Zaborowski, Policy Director at the Future of Security Program at GLOBSEC. Hello and welcome to TVP.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So let us begin with the operation in the Kursk region. Apparently, Ukraine didn't tell its allies about it. Do you think that this has indeed been the case? And if so, what could be the consequences?
I mean, definitely in general terms, Ukraine did inform the allies that it wanted to conduct operations at the Russian territory, and it got permission to do so at Washington summit. So in Washington summit, which was in midst of July, NATO allies agreed that NATO assets, that the assets delivered to Ukraine from the Western allies, can be used for the operations at the Russian territory. However, as to the specifics, that this particular area would be attacked, or this would be, that it would be a theater of the Ukrainian offensive, I expect that the Ukrainians did not inform the allies about the specifics of that, because not least for the reasons of operational secrecy and the need to actually surprise the Russians. Yeah.
Well, of course, but do you think that these agreements pertained mostly to missile strikes, but the allies never thought this would be a land incursion into Russian territory proper?
I think so, yeah. I think that's exactly what happened. I think that the allies, when they gave this permission to use the assets in Washington, D.C., they thought that, well, this is about some missile strikes indeed, but that's not about actually invading the territory of Russia, but the Ukrainians interpreted it the way they wanted to interpret that, and meaning in a quite liberal way for themselves. And now nobody can say that they were not informed. Nobody can say that the Ukrainians are going too far. They cannot do so openly after the communication of a NATO summit.
Could it be that this offensive was intended in order to prove once and for all that there are no Russian red lines, that Russia is not going to do anything? Could it have been the motivation? I mean, the escalation logic has been prevalent in US policies. Quite recently, in an article in Financial Times, there has been a suggestion that some members of the Biden administration thought, and perhaps still think, that President Zelenskyy could be trying to drag the US deeper into this conflict, deliberately.
President Zelenskyy has been trying to drag the US into this conflict right from the beginning, and that's quite natural and rational thing to do. So that's clear from the point of view of Ukrainian defensive. The more US is engaged, the better it is for Ukraine itself. So that's not in itself surprising. But there have been two very important psychological elements addressed here with this operation. Number one, it was to demonstrate to the Russian population that they are not being immune to the costs of Russia conducting war on a territory of a neighboring country, that there are consequences here, and that the Russians can also suffer, not just conscripts or troops, conscripts drafted from Far East Asia, let's mention, not from Moscow or St. Petersburg. And the other element, indeed, is what you just said yourself, meaning that the red lines, that the Russians have been kind of hinting, if our territory is being threatened, then we use nuclear weapons, then there will be a very serious response. And the territory has been now occupied, in fact, by the Ukrainians, and nothing dramatic really happened.
1,200 square kilometers.
It's not much, but it is something, yeah. And nothing very dramatic happened. Yeah? That means,
do you think it still can, though?
It doesn't seem likely. It doesn't seem very likely. It seems like that that everybody is doing. The Ukrainians are doing their own thing, and the Russians are doing their own thing. The Russian thing is the offensive in Donbass, and moving towards the taking over of the city of Pokrovsk. And that's what the Russian armed forces are being focused on, and the Ukrainians are doing their own thing in the Kursk region. And it doesn't seem like that, crossing some red lines led to some dramatic escalation or the use of the weapons which wouldn't have been used otherwise. I mean, of course, we had this massive attack on city of Moscow, on Kiev, on the territory of Ukraine, day before yesterday.
Including a hydroelectric power plant.
Yes.
I mean, if that caused a major rupture of the dam, results could have been catastrophic.
Absolutely. But that happened in the past. That's not new. Yeah?
Well, I mean, it did, but not near to the city of Kiev itself. Some say, well, if that happened, millions would have suffered, and hundreds of thousands perhaps could have been killed because of that.
Yeah, but I don't think
almost like using a nuclear weapon without using a nuclear weapon.
Yes, but I don't think that's a concern of the Russians that too many people will suffer. Yeah? I mean, they blew up the dam in Kakhovka last year. They flooded many villages and small towns. They didn't care about consequences of that. So why would we think that they care about the fate of people in Kiev or near Kiev? Yeah?
So, looking at the situation now from a vantage point, President Zelenskyy said that he's going to present what he called a victory plan to President Joe Biden, also to Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
We don't really know what it contains. We're going to learn further down the line. But he said Kursk forms a part of it.
Yeah.
How do you think it could work?
Well, I think that what you suggested before, that the Americans are surprised about the scale of operation in Kursk. I think that they are uneasy about it. They've been extremely cautious in the past about supplying Ukraine with certain weapons because they were fearing escalation. They were overly cautious. For example, most members of American military I spoke with, they think that the administration has been just, too timid, really. So I can imagine that in Washington there is a lot of unease about what's going on in Kursk. There's a lot of unease, and I think that Zelenskyy wants to come and say there is a reason for that, there is a purpose, and then I have some kind of a plan, and don't you worry about that. So. But I think that at this point in time, the American administration is not on the same page as the Ukrainians regarding that operation.
So President Zelenskyy said specifically that this plan is only going to work if America is going to give Ukraine certain things and not place restrictions on the use of those things. Nothing specific. I mean, weapons, certainly. Yeah. But so this doesn't sound like a plan for negotiations. Sounds like a plan for conducting a victorious military campaign.
Yes. Yeah. I think that the Ukrainians want to change the narrative. They also want to change the situation on the ground when they are all the time on the defensive. They want to be on the offensive and to make Russians worried and concerned about their own security. And that really changes the psychology, but also changes the operational situation on the ground. Yeah? And I think I suspect this is what the aim and the target, this is what really Zelenskyy wants to do, to turn the tables on the situation. He's not there yet. In order to be there, indeed, he does need to have a certainty that weapons will be delivered on time, that a certain type of weapons will be delivered on time. And for now, the Americans gave a general permission to hit targets at the Russian territory, but they did not, in my view, they did not know about the Kursk operation. They're surprised. So the Allies need to sort of sit down and say, this is what I want, yeah? And I hope you are with me on this.
So you've mentioned the degree of unease in Washington. Speaking of unease, President Zelenskyy said he's going to speak to Kamala Harris and also to Donald Trump. We know that there is no great degree of sympathy from Donald Trump to President Zelenskyy. I mean, he called him like, the best salesman in the world in the past, made some of these rather curious-sounding remarks. Do you think, nevertheless, perhaps such a meeting could pave the way to potential cooperation if Donald Trump wins these elections? Because commentators mostly agree it's going to be a more difficult path than if a Democratic candidate won.
Well, I think that Zelenskyy has been playing the game within the American politics quite smartly. He has not alienated Donald Trump. He made this phone call with Donald Trump, after which Donald Trump has been going around and saying that I had this conversation with President Zelenskyy, he praised me, he liked me, it was a great phone call, and that is exactly the way you need to play your diplomacy with Donald Trump. Flattery will get you a very long way.
Well, before that, we've had this crisis in the Congress. I mean, for half a year or more, the funding for Ukraine was blocked. And Speaker Mike Johnson, only after quite a long time of deliberating upon it, finally said, okay, we're going to put this to the vote, right?
Yeah, but the money was eventually released, and if Donald Trump was adamantly against it, I don't think it would be. So
well, that's a fair point.
So I think that Trump wanted to keep. He didn't want to sort of to close that possibility there. So the money was released. The money is out there. It's making a big difference on the ground right now. So I think that Ukrainians know that they got it easier politically with Democrats, but then at the same time, Democrats are also too timid and too cautious in delivering certain type of weaponry that Ukraine thinks that it needs. And that there have been so many red lines along the way. So, I mean, now F-16 are flying there, Patriots are being used in Ukraine. A few months back, there were huge red lines, and the Democratic administration was dead against that. So the more difficult Democrats are, the more there is an outreach from Ukrainians towards Republicans and actually speaking with Trump.
But very briefly, I mean, Donald Trump, it's a bit like rolling a dice, right? You can roll a 6, but you can also roll a 1 and lose out seriously, right?
Yeah. I think with Donald Trump, they know that they need flattery. That's number one. And number two, with Donald Trump, if he does get on board, there are no red lines. Yeah? So in a sense, I mean, they may be under the impression that might be even easier with Trump, because if they convince him, then it wouldn't be so difficult as it is with Democrats who give permission, but with so many caveats.
No, it is a big if, and of course it's impossible to predict the future. So for the time being, we're going to park our conversation here. Marcin Zaborowski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And I'm Jan You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.